Hi class, in lesson 6.4 we will be determining the part, whole, or percent of percent problems. Learning targets for today: determining the percent given the part and the whole, determining the whole given a part and the percent, and finally determining the part if we are given the whole and the percent. Let's take a look at problem 1 on page 434. It says, previously you have learned how to determine the percent of a number. You can use your knowledge of percents to determine the whole of a group or the percent of the whole that a certain number represents. Let's take a look at number 1. It says this picture shows triangles. You can see that we have 6 of them here. Take a look at letter A. If the picture shown is 30% of the triangles, draw 100% of the triangles. Letter B asks, what percent is one triangle? Go ahead and do letter A and letter B for number 1. If we take a look at letter A and B, you can see that for number 1, it says that 30% would be 6 triangles. So if 30% would be 6, if I think back to benchmark percents, that would mean that 10% would be 2. So if I know that 10% is going to be 2 triangles, I know 100% then is going to be 20. If I know that 2 triangles are going to be 10%, one triangle then must be 5% for letter B. Let's take a look at number 2. It says analyze the rectangle shown. It says if the rectangle shown is 25% of another rectangle, then answer letters A through C. You want to draw 50% of the other rectangle, 75% of the other rectangle, and for letter C, 100% of the other rectangle. Go ahead and do A through C for number 2. Here is what your answers should look like for A through C. If the original rectangle that I had was 25%, then I would need 2 of them for 50%, 3 of them for 75% for letter B, and 4 of them for 100% for letter C. Let's take a look at number 3 at the top of page 435. It says the figure shown represents 75% of the whole figure. For letter A, draw 25% of the figure, and letter B, draw 100% of the figure. Go ahead and do 3A and B. Here is what letter A and letter B should look like. If the figure shown represents 75%, you would only have one triangle for letter A, representing 25% of the figure. If you needed to draw 100% of the figure, you would need to have 4 triangles to represent 100%. Let's take a look at number 4. It says the rectangle shown represents 150%. For letter A, it says on the rectangle shade 50% of the rectangle. And for letter B then, what is the percent of the rectangle that is not shaded? Go ahead and do letters A and B for number 4. Here is what your answers should look like for letter A and letter B for number 4. If I break that rectangle up into equal sized parts, you can see that 50% of the rectangle would be shaded in. And for letter B, the unshaded part, that would represent 100%. Let's take a look at number 5 on page 436. It says the figure shown represents 700%, and it wants you to draw 100%. So go ahead and do number 5. This is what your drawing should look like for number 5. 2 of the squares would make up 100% of the figure that shows 700%. And finally, let's take a look at number 6. It says the figure shown represents 160%. For letter A, they want you to draw 10%. And for letter B, they want you to draw 100%. So go ahead and do number 6, A and B. Here's what your answers should look like for number 6. For letter A, we should have 1x. If I have 16 x's that represent 160%, then I would only have 1 x that would represent 10% for letter A. For letter B then, in order to draw 100%, Again, if there are 16 x's representing 160%, I would draw 10 x's to represent 100%. Let's turn to page 437 and take a look at problem 2, determining parts, wholes, and percents. It says that percent problems involve three quantities: the part, the whole, and the percent. If you know two of the quantities, you can determine the third. Let's think back to lesson 6.3. It says previously you calculated the price of a notebook after the 25% discount. The notebook cost $2.95 and the discount was 25%. You calculated either 25% of the $2.95 and subtracted the difference from the total, or you can calculate 75% of $2.95 as well. The whole usually comes after the word of in percent problems. The percent is generally indicated in percent problems. So let's investigate a situation that involves determining the percent if you know the part and the whole. So in the example it says, in the middle school chorus, 34 out of the 50 students are girls. What percent of the chorus is girls? So Holly used a double number line to think about the problem. Take a look at the double number line shown right here. After she used a double number line, she wrote equivalent fractions. So we have our 34 out of 50, and what out of 100 is that going to be equal to? So Holly determined that by doubling 50, she could calculate the percent. Since 50 times 2 is equal to 100, she calculated the denominator for a percent. Then she multiplied the numerator by the same factor of 2, which is going to give her 34 times 2, and the answer would be 68. So her answer is 68%. So really what we are doing is, again, talking about our scaling up factors. We are multiplying, in this case, by a fraction form of 1, which would be 2 over 2. Down at the bottom it says, when you are calculating percents, you may want to avoid simplifying fractions. Instead, determine an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. So let's take a look at number 1 on page 438. And just like I said earlier, if you take a look at our friend here with the word bubble, it says, since percents are part to whole ratios, this is just like using the scaling up method to find equivalent ratios. So keep that in mind as you're trying to find the answers for number 1, A, B, and C. So take a look at number 1. It says the middle school has 25 students. The middle school band has 25 students. We're going to go ahead and answer letters A, B, and C. Letter A asks us 12 students play brass instruments. What percent of band members play brass instruments? Letter B, 8 students play the drums. What percent of band members play the drums? And letter C, 5 students play woodwinds. What percent of band members play woodwinds? So go ahead and answer A through C. Here is what your answers should look like for letter A. For all three of these, A, B, and C, my scaling up factor is going to be 4. So 12 times 4 is going to give me 48. That means that 48% of the students play brass instruments for letter A. For letter B, again, my scaling up factor is 4. 8 times 4 gives me 32. 32% of the students play the drums. And finally, for letter C, again, my scaling up factor is 4. 5 times 4 gives me 20. 20% of the students play woodwinds. Let's take a look at the bottom of page 438. It says you can write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100 by doubling, tripling, or even quadrupling the original denominator, scaling up by 2, 3, 4, etc. However, some denominators are not a factor of 100. So when this occurs, you can simply divide the numerator by the denominator to calculate the decimal equivalent of the fraction. Then you can multiply the decimal by 100 to determine the percent. So let's take a look at number 2 as an example of what we just talked about in the previous paragraph. It says Jasmine is a piano and organ teacher. Of the 36 students she teaches, 19 take piano lessons. What percent of her students take piano lessons? So remember, 36 is not going to go into 100 evenly. So remember, you're going to divide the numerator by the denominator in order to determine the percent. So go ahead and do number 2 down at the bottom of page 438. So if I take a look at my answer for number 2, 19 divided by 36 is going to give me this long decimal on my calculator. Remember, I'm moving my decimal point over 2 spots to the right. That would give me right around 52.8%, or around 53% of the students that Jasmine teaches are going to then take piano lessons. Let's take a look at number 3 on page 439. It says the 7th grade marching band has 40 members. First, calculate the percent for each type of instrument, the brass, woodwinds, and percussion. Then after you are done doing that, calculate the percent of each instrument in the band. So let's take a look at the first part of number 3 that you had to answer, calculating the percent for each type of instrument. If we look at the brass instruments first, we have 23 students out of 40 total. I have 23 out of 40 students that play brass instruments. So remember, I can show division, 23 divided by 40. That's going to give me my answer of 57.5%. Over to the woodwinds, 10 out of the 40 students play a woodwind instrument. That's going to come out to 25%, 10 divided by 40. And if I do the same thing for percussion, 7 out of 40 gives me my 17.5%. So go ahead and finish up the rest of the table. You are now calculating the percent of each instrument in the band. Here is what the rest of the table should look like for number 3. Now, something that we want to make sure we understand, if we look at these 3 numbers here, they should all add up to that 57.5% that we got for the brass instruments. If we look at the woodwind instruments, these 3 numbers here should add up to our 25% that we had for the woodwinds. And if we look at the percussion instruments, these 2 numbers should add up to the 17.5% that we got for the percussion. And overall, if you looked at every single one of these together, when you add these up, you should get your 100%. Let's take a look at the top of page 440. It says the 6th grade class was asked the question, how do you spend most of your time on computers? The results of the survey are shown here in the table. So we have in the left column the activity done while spending time on computers, and in the right column we have the number of students. Number 4 says, what percent of the 6th grade class preferred each activity? Round your answers to the nearest whole percent. Now remember, you're going to have to figure out the total number of students in order to figure out what that percent is for each of the activities. So go ahead and do number 4. So here's what your answer should look like for number 4. First, the total number of students was 250. So if you take a look over here on the left, this is where I showed my work. Remember, 88 divided by 250 then is going to give me my answer of 35%. Remember, you were rounding your answers to the nearest whole percent. So 35% of the students preferred emailing or instant messaging while they were spending time on the computers. The work for the rest of the activities is also shown. 70 divided by 250 is going to give you 28%. 30 divided by 250, 12%. 24 divided by 250, 10%. And 38 divided by 250, 15%. that is going to be it for lesson 6.4 on determining the part whole or percent of percent problems. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.